me to the grand ballroom. We've had trouble getting certain higher-ups to admit that I need the grand ballroom. So, you know, if you have a chance to tell FanX something they can improve on, they can put us in the grand ballroom, because there's another several hundred of you outside that didn't get in. And so we need to be in the grand ballroom is what I think. Once upon a time, we didn't fill this room, so here we are. This is the Brandon Sanderson solo panel. If you've never been to one of these before, what I'm going to do is, we are going to start off with a Q&A, and then we're going to do a reading. The reading has slight spoilers. Not huge spoilers, it's going to be from Stormlight 5. To give you a chance to bail if you want to bail. That said, this is from a flashback sequence. This is one of Seth's flashback sequences. So, the spoilers are minor so far. Unless you guys really want something super spoiler, we'll talk about it then. The spoilers should be minor from this. We'll warn you when we get there. So we're going to do questions right here from this microphone, and I'm going to start talking at you guys. We okay, video guy, if I'm standing up? For a thumbs up. All right, I would sit down for the reading, but I like to stand for this part. It gives me a better view of the crowd and things like that. So, you go ahead at the front.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Pete. I'm a big fan of your work. I just have a question about any advice you have for aspiring writers who are on the first draft of a favorite fantasy book. Any advice for writers?
Yeah, for advice for an author on the first draft. I'll repeat most of the questions so we get them on this mic as well. I should say, by the way, and good for you if you're not doing this, try not to ask questions that will spoil one of the books. All right? So, first draft. I heard advice when I was starting out that was really handy for me. It's not the right advice for everyone, but it was the right advice for me, which is, your first few books are generally terrible, so don't worry about them. Now, why this can be good advice is it took off from me the stress of needing to worry about the publishing side, which is super stressful, and let me focus on, I'm just going to write things and enjoy it. The first draft's job is to teach you how to finish something. And to teach you, like, you will never grow as much as a writer as you do writing that first book. And so, you want to train yourself in the things that you love. What makes you love writing? What makes you get your writing done? Build good habits. Don't get stressed if something doesn't work. One of the issues is that generally as a new writer, your ability to recognize great fiction will outstrip your ability to create it. As you learn, that learning curve, it's different for the two things. So you might start saying, wow, my ending is broken, or this is broken, or whatever, or whatnot. Don't get discouraged, it happens to everyone. You're actually getting to be a much better writer as you go, but you're also learning to recognize writing. So take these early books and just focus on enjoying the process, building good habits, and finishing things. That's the most important part, all right?
Thank you so much.
If you haven't, watch my writing lectures on YouTube. I've got 13 writing lectures. There just might be a way you class. Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of a weird question. I'm just wondering how you research or figure out stuff or experiences that you don't have. So, like, Paladin's sad, or Vin's experience as a young woman, or Kelsey or being a jerk.
Yes. That one I have a better handle on myself. So this is an excellent question. The question is, how do you go about researching and writing characters who are different from yourself? Because this is the bulk of the writing you'll do, right? You might get lucky and be able to write one book that's basically starring someone just like yourself, but from all the other characters are going to be different. And it's a mixture of things. Number one, I recommend every character that you're going to spend a lot of time with, put a little bit of yourself into. Something that is about you. Now this might not be, hopefully it's not always your personality, but they can be interested in something you're interested in. Or they could have had a struggle that you've had, or things like this. One little piece of you in every character is really going to help you have something to focus on with that character to make them work. Now, there should be, for every character you write, something very different from yourself as well. And in this case, you live in the best time to be a writer, because you can find a wealth of information very easily. If you want to find out what it's like to live with depression or dissociative identity disorder or any of these things, you will find people's blogs where they are talking about these struggles. Indeed, one of the things they'll do is they'll say, here is how people get it wrong in media all the time. And that often tells you so much. And so you can go to primary sources and you can read. You can also find early readers who can help you know what you're doing wrong. It gets challenging because no person is a monolith, meaning if you find one person who is, say, has DID, someone else might not have their experience. So it's better when you can find multiples, and so that you can kind of guide yourself as you're doing this, but talk to people, listen. Great writers are often really good listeners. Try to express authentic feelings for those people in your characters, and just practice it a lot, all right? Good question.
Mine is very much a magic system question. We've seen in the multiple worlds of the Cosmere the different ways they measure investiture, and with it slowly starting to converge more and more, and also a seemingly imminent tabletop game in the works. My question is...
Seemingly imminent meaning we have decided we're going to do it, but have no idea what we're doing yet.
Timelines are important. My question is, do you have an internal universal system of measurement for investiture, and will we get any of that anytime soon?
So, we are working on it right now. I actually called up some physicists I know, and this was about 5 years ago now, and said, all right, we're going to need some units of measurement so we can take a breath and determine how much is in it and things like that. And it just about broke their brains, because they're like, there's just so much here, but we've been working on it. My goal will be to deliver this to you eventually, but we don't really need it till Space Age, which is post-Era 3 Mistborn. But by then, I hope that we'll have it. I hope we'll have it before then, but yes, it is something we're working on. I don't have it off the, I couldn't just, it's not something I wrote though, saying how much investment is in a breath versus a sphere. It's something we're going to have to look at what I've done with all of them, and then come up with something.
And it's not intentionally secret or anything.
It's not intentionally secret. It is something I've known for a while I would need, but that's why you hire very smart people, and make it their problem.
I have a question also about investiture. If you were to be on schedule as a Mistborn and burn a god medal such as, say, honor, what would come of that? Would it be specific to the system that it's from, or is it kind of like a blanket like alien?
Okay, so the question is, if you were on schedule and you burned a god medal from another planet, what would happen to you? Would you get something specific to this world, or would it be a blanket? So, the answer is... Rafo, here's your Rafo card! Sorry. You knew you were going to get Rafo. If you don't know what Rafo is, it's something I inherited from Robert Jordan. Actually, I literally inherited it because, I'll get to you in a second, but I want to tell this story. People like stories. So, you probably, I told it, no. Okay, so, Robert Jordan, during the early days, people started asking him questions like this, right? And he liked getting the questions, like I like getting the questions, but sometimes you can't answer them because too many spoilers, or you don't want to stop the discussion. That's another big reason. You want the fans to be having this conversation. If you answer everything, then there aren't fun things to talk about. And sometimes you haven't decided yet. And so Robert Jordan came up with a blanket phrase he would give that was for one of those three, and you don't know which one it is, and it was read and find out. That got Jordan to Rafo. When he passed away and I was asked to work on the wheel time, I went to visit Harriet and she handed me a little bracelet that a fan had made for Robert Jordan that had beads on it that said Rafo. And she said, "I am giving you the Rafo. The Rafo is now yours, Brandon." Like it's a physical object almost that she gave me a physical object. It represents that you are now the Rafo. Use it wisely. It was like inheriting someone's lightsaber or something. It was right? And so I had these cards printed off because I felt bad saying to people just read and find out without giving them something. And so we're in our second generation of cards. The first ones were red for the wheel of time. Now we're on to these blue ones. So if you get Rafo, and among some of the community, this is a mark of pride and honor that you get to staple to the wall. It means you've asked a really good question that Brandon's not going to answer. So there's your Rafo.
You touched on this a bit earlier, but as someone who relates to Kaladin, Captain Wayne a lot, and was absolutely bawling when Tef
okay. Yeah, you gotta be careful not to give any spoilers.
Yeah, how do you research into that and some suggestions for other writers to write better about depression?
So with Teft in specific, I went to a specific individual that I knew who had been incarcerated for heroin-related crimes, and I said, "All right, let's talk, and let's talk about about addiction, and let's talk about what and then a lot of other primary sources. With things like depression, it's a little easier because I have family members I can talk to, and I can try out a scene and I can give it to them. I do this partially because when I was working on Stormlight Archive, I was developing it. One of the things I noticed is that a lot of times, if someone has a mental health issue they're struggling with, it seems like the only stories they can be in are ones where that's the main focus. And the more people I come to know, the more I realize, like, there's no normal, right? Like, everybody has things and parts of their personalities that make it challenging to be them. Some are more extreme than others, but we all have, like, aspects that are challenging. And some cross the line into what we would call a mental problem where it like impacts your life. Some people can live with that same thing, would not call it a mental health issue for them. And it's really all very fuzzy, but we all have these things. And I'm like, why are we pretending that, that people in fantasy novels aren't going to get PTSD? I know that there's other people who've done that, but you know what I mean? Like, why don't I see people who just have depression? And that's just how it is. That's not what their story's about, but it's part of who they are. And I thought, well, I'm going to start trying to write my characters a little more real to life. And that's where the Stormlight Archive came from. It wasn't that I sat down and said, I'm going to make a series about the struggles of mental health. I sat down and said, I want to talk about real people. And the real people I know all have certain aspects of their personality that are very difficult to live with, myself included. And so that's where it came from.
I want to say thanks for writing those characters too.
It is my pleasure.
So I saw a quote somewhere that Stephen Leeds is a character that you find yourself in a lot, and I wanted to know if that was accurate, and I just wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit. What parts of his character do you relate to and why?
Yeah, Stephen Leeds might be one of the most me-like characters I've ever written, and that is because if you haven't read the books, it's a very, so we just talked about very realistic depictions of mental health. It is a very sci-fi depiction, shall we say, unrealistic to an extent. I developed his own psychoses. It does not fit in the DSM. In fact, in the books, they say, you don't have what this is, you have your own weird thing. But I started actually with the idea of someone who was schizophrenic and the voices were helping, right? And things like that. And I spun that into, if you haven't read the series, it's about a person who's who has a whole bunch that almost work like alters, but they're not quite. A bunch of created individuals that are repositories for his genius. And so if he studies something, he will create a figment, a delusion, or maybe even an altar, but it's even further disassociated altar that holds all of that. And so basically, he's a one-man super team with 50 different specialties, but he can't use them. If he has somebody that he studies French, and he creates one of these that can speak French, they have to interpret for him. He doesn't speak French. His delusion speaks French, and will listen and tell him what's going on. And so the whole idea there was, I was getting at this idea of, as a writer, I feel that that's what I do, right? I am like a manager of all of these different characters who are all like, you gotta tell my story, you gotta tell my story. How's it? I'm like, you need to get in line, and we need to do it in a way that's structured and fits. No, we can't only do Wayne jokes. Wayne, you gotta share some time because you gotta have balance, and you gotta have a story to go with your wisecracks. This is the sort of thing, and it really felt when I was writing those stories that it was like me, the author, taking all these. Now, I am not schizophrenic. I do not actually see visual personifications of the characters and things like that, but it really felt in a lot of ways I was reaching to my writer self to create and write this character, particularly the Third Legion novella. There's 3 novellas that are collected into one thing. That's the one where it really came out. It's also the weirdest of them, so there you go. So yes, the answer is yes. A long-winded yes. All right, we're gonna go 7 more minutes on this, and then I'm gonna read for 20 minutes, okay?
Hi, so talking about Wayne earlier, I was just wondering, what was your inspiration for this character?
What was my inspiration for Wayne? What a wonderful question. So Wayne started as a person who changed personalities every time they put on a new hat. That was actually, I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting thing for a character. Someone who changes personalities by hat. And then I just kind of started writing. The first thing I ever wrote for Wayne was Wayne is right. I wanted to be a Western. I don't know why. I guess it was because I was setting it in this time, and he was, in a Western often the hero rides into town on a horse and then rides it, right? So he's riding into town on a horse, and the horse is Milan, because she's, a conjuress, she's got a horse body. So he's there making wisecracks, bounce things, riding into town, and I'm like, this character is such a handful. He needs a different character, because Milan's kind of a handful, who can actually wrangle this story. So I stepped back, and I devised Wax to kind of be the straight man that these weirdos could play off of, and then he became a weirdo too. If you've read things in Morning, you're like, they're all weird. There's a scene that's supposed to say, no, even Morrissey's kind of wacky. But the idea was that he needed somebody to play off of. When I was writing the story, it was not working. And so once I developed Wax, and Wax was stuck in his boring life. That's the opening chapter. And then Wayne shows up and says, guess what? We're going on an adventure. That was the interaction that worked for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, so I have kind of a 2-part question. First, I have read that it's easier for female authors to write male heroes than it is for male authors to write female heroines.
Yes, this is generally, in my experience, been true and generally agreed upon as true.
And typically the male authors pull from relationships that they have with females to create those characters.
Yes, which runs into problems because male authors tend to write females in roles rather than as characters. Yeah.
So with that said, what inspired your development of Wayne, and is there a specific relationship that you pull from to create?
Yes, so this is true. Now, that's not to say there aren't women who have trouble writing men, right? But generally, the way our society works and things like that, what you end up with is men tend to, if you're guy writers who want to know this, we tend to start off by writing, this person's role is the love interest. This person's role is the mother figure. This person's role, we do it generally with all characters, but specifically with female characters, and then the characters come off as cardboard because they don't have volition. And kind of making the switch in your head that every character should be the protagonist in their own story. They may not be a hero, but they are the protagonist. They're the one acting in their own story. Shaking yourself out of this is the role for a character is a big help. For me, a couple of things really helped me. my early books, I had trouble with this. Even though I think I had a leg up because my introduction to fantasy was Anne McCaffrey, Melanie Ron, and Barbara Hamley, which were the first three fantasy authors I read. And they kind of, particularly Anne McCaffrey, set the standard in my head for what a fantasy book was. For many years, Anne McCaffrey was my favorite writer. She's fantastic and criminally underread, even though she's still one of the more popular fantasy writers out there. She has passed away, but Todd is here, her son, who's a wonderful individual and a very good writer in his own right. Yes. One of my very first signings, by the way, was next to Anne McCaffrey. I had one person. He was a collector who showed up. It's like, I haven't read your book, but I collect everything that is published. And then there was Anne McCaffrey who had quite the line, and I was tickled just to be next to her. I think there was that helped me notice that I was doing it wrong. These are my unpublished books. And I would say that the big change for me was making that change in my head. And by the time I was writing Vin, I had figured this out. I'm not writing any character to a role. I'm starting with, what does this character want? Who are they? Originally, Vin was much more artful dodger, wisecracking, and it just did not work. I'm like, no, this isn't her. I need somebody who's like a product of their society, and it's really when I hit on the idea, like Vin's core sort of ideal is, life has taught her that everyone is a bad person, but she has somehow managed not to be corrupted by that. Like, if you get that is what it is. And part of the learning is, hey, there might be other people that are like this, but then there's other issues that she gets into. But getting that core thing, like, who is the person who has remained keeping some of their being an actual genuine good person? Who would grow up as she did and manage to do that? And that spark is what became her whole personality.
Well, I related strongly to Vin when I read the book, so I very much appreciate the take that you took on it.
Well, thank you. I did have a 14-year-old sister at the time who read the book and gave me pointers. Lauren, Lauren, she was an interesting 14-year-old. She did not like me ever using the word damn or hell, the words damn or hell, and so she replaced them all with her own versions in the draft I gave her. So I got back this thing to type in changes, and everyone was changed to things like bone doggy head. Just the weirdest stuff. This is my youngest sister. She went to Lord of the Rings 22 times in the theater, so so she's got credit. Alright, this is going to happen for be our last question, so I'm sorry to all of you guys. I will do the mystical question here, and then we're going to do the reading.
Okay, sorry, this is a super specific Fabrial question. If you use keyboards or Metaloid in Fabrial, could you theoretically steal any kind of message or even on breaths?
Theoretically, there's a way to accomplish what you want to do, but I'm not going to get into the details now. But yes, theoretically, there's a way to do that. Yes, and you're hitting on the right idea. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to go to a reading now. Yes. Now, should I give you a choice? You guys want a choice? We can read from the Zap flashback, which is not very spoilery at all. But it's a flashback. It's meant to come in the middle of the book. It's whatever. Or we can read from the first chapter, which is more spoilery. Alright, I'm going to give huge spoilers for the Stormlight Archive. So, if you have not read Rhythm of War, you want to take the chance to maybe sneak out right now, and we will not judge you at all. You can watch this after you have read Rhythm of War. And you can come back, and you can get it. Alright. And I will say you guys. So they're going to want to do this. So yes, you can do it. This is first draft, guys. First draft. So there's going to be a lot of stuff in this. Things might change. Just be warning you. But now that they're all young, so this is Paladin from Book 5. I think you guys are going to find this really interesting. We're going to read for roughly 20 minutes here, just until we run out of time. I could use, because I'm going to be reading on my phone, I could use like a 5-minute and a 1-minute warning. Can you give those to me, Octavia? Because my phone, when I go into the reading thing, doesn't show me the time. Kaladin felt good. Not great. Not after spending weeks hiding in an occupied city, forced to stretch himself both physically and emotionally far beyond the reasonable limits. Not after what had happened to Teft. No, Kaladin didn't feel great. But as he stood in the sunlight, looking out the window of his room, he thought that maybe he would someday feel great again. Knowing that, being able to recognize it, was enough. Indeed, there was an incongruent spring to his step as he walked to his mirror. Why did he feel good? Yes, they protected Earthiru, but at great cost. Dalinar had set a deadline that was horrifically soon. War was coming upon them, and Kaladin wasn't going to even be part of it. He was on leave, self-imposed this time. He'd said the right words, but had realized that those words weren't enough. Stormlight healed his body, but his soul needed time. Bridge 4 and the Windrunners would go to battle without him. He should feel awful. A part of him simply refused to do so. He picked through his clothing, stacks of civilian clothing neatly laundered for him and delivered this morning. The world might be ending in 10 days, but Earthiru's washwomen soldiered on. None of the choices felt right, and shortly he glanced toward the wall, where a new uniform hung, sent via the quartermaster to replace the one Kaladin had ruined during the fighting 2 days before. Clayton kept a rack of them in Kaladin's size. Kaladin had stuck it there with the lashing last night after Teft's funeral. Testing something he'd been told by the others. Earthiru was awake now, with its own bondsmith, and things were different. That lashing he'd used should have run out after minutes, yet here this one was, 10 hours later, still going strong. The extended powers only worked in the city, but he could already see that going forward, this would be a very different place to live. Assuming anyone survived the next 2 weeks. A short time later, Syl poked her head into his room, without any thought for privacy, as usual. Granted, his room didn't have a door, but a hanging clock. Doors were in short supply, and they'd installed their first ones on the examination rooms up the hallway to offer privacy to the patients. Not that a door would have stopped Syl. She could squeeze through the smallest cracks. Except today she was walking around full human size for some reason, and wearing a hava instead of her usual girlish dress. She was doing that more commonly as of late. As Kaladin did the last buttons on the high collar of his uniform jacket, she bounced over to stand behind him, then floated up in the air a foot or so to look over his shoulder at him in the mirror. Can't you make yourself any size? He asked, checking his jacket cuffs. Yeah, within reason. Whose reason? No idea, she said. I tried to get as big as a mountain once. Involved lots of grunting and thinking like rocks. Really big rocks. I managed a very small mountain. Like, enough to fit in this room with the tip brushing the ceiling, but super narrow. That's as big as I could go. So, you can be tall enough to tower over me, he said. Why do you usually make yourself shorter than me instead? It just feels right, she says. That's your explanation for basically everything. Yep. She poked him. He could barely feel it. Even at this size, she was insubstantial in the physical realm. Uniform? I thought you weren't going to wear one of those anymore. What happened? He hesitated, then pulled the jacket down at the bottom to smooth the wrinkles across the sides. It just feels right, he admitted, meeting her eyes in the mirror. She grinned, and stormed him. He couldn't help but grinning back. Someone is having a good day, she said, poking him again. Bizarrely, Kaladin said, if I understand right, the world is slated to end in 10 days. To maybe end in 10 days. And, let's see. The enemy appears to be mobilizing for some reason, rather than just waiting for the deadline. What do they hope to accomplish? Something nefarious, no doubt, she said. More people are going to die, he replied. Perhaps people I care about. I won't be there to help them, and Kaladin Stormblessed, she said, rising up into the air higher, arms folded. Though she wore the fashionable hava, she left her white-blue glowing hair flowing free, waving and shifting in the wind. The non-existent wind, currently. She raised up until she loomed 2 feet above him. Don't you dare talk yourself into being miserable. Or what? Or I, she thundered, shall make silly faces at you all day, as only I can. Those aren't silly, he said, shivering. They're hilarious. Last time you made a tentacle come out of your forehead. Highbrow comedy. A spinning eyeball growing from the end of it. Every joke needs a good twist. Then it slapped me. Punchline, obviously. She shook her head. Storms, all the humans in the world, and I ended up picking the one without a taste for refined humor. He met her eyes, and her smile was stormy and contagious. It just feels warm, he said, to have finally figured a few things out. To have made progress despite it all. To have let go of that weight I was carrying and have stepped out from the shadow. I know the darkness will return, but I think I'll be able to remember this time. Better than before. Remember what? He met her eyes, lashing himself upward, floating until he was eye level with her. That days like this exist too. She nodded firmly. I wish I could show Taft, Kaladin said. I'm missing like a hole in my own flesh still. I know, she said softly. If she'd been a human friend, she might have offered a hug. Syl didn't seem to understand physicality like a human did, even if she had a more substantial body in the cognitive realm. He got the feeling she didn't actually spend much time there, though. She seemed more natural to this realm than the other honor spren, flitting around about like the wind spren she sometimes imitated. And indeed, today, to cheer him up, she waved eagerly and led him out to the main living room of the family quarters. She did it, though, full human size and wearing no hava, but flying about, moving with a swooping motion that was, honestly, a tad ridiculous to watch. Kaladin followed, though, continuing to hover. Because why not? It felt like he wasn't even using up his stormlight. Or if he was, it was constantly replenished, like what happened when Dalinar opened a perpendicularity. In the main living room, they found Orodin playing with his blocks. At Syl's suggestion, they spent a good half hour hovering the blocks in the air for the toddler. It felt a strange use of his powers, literally harvested from the essence of a god. But when he stopped, Orodin pointed. Kagan, the little boy said, pointing. You need blocks. So you, in this case, meant Orodin himself, who had noticed that everyone called him you, and had decided that was just another name for him. Kaladin smiled, hovering up another set of blocks. Syl, shrunken down, hopped from block to block in the air as Orodin swatted and moved them. What am I doing? Kaladin thought after a little of that. The world is ending, my best friend is dead, and I'm playing blocks with my little brother. Then in response, a voice deep from within him, familiar, almost certainly imagined. Hold on to this, Cal. Embrace it. I didn't die so you could mope about like a wet horn-eater with no razor. It didn't seem anything mystical, but instead, well, Kaladin had known Teft long enough to anticipate what the man would have said. Even in death, a good sergeant knew his job. Keep the officers pointed the right direction. Hill, Orodin said, gesturing to Syl. Hill, come pin! He was off a second later with Syl following after as he hopped and pointed, then started spinning around in circles with her twirling around him. Kaladin watched, seated on the floor amidst hovering blocks. His mother settled down beside him and nudged him in the side, then handed him a bowl with some lavish grain and spiced crab meat on the top. She wore her hair tied with a kerchief, like she'd always done when working back in Hearthstone. He took the bowl of food without complaint, though he didn't feel particularly like eating. As his mother eyed him, he dutifully started anyway. If there was a group more demanding than sergeants when it came to an officer's well-being, it would be mothers. When he'd been younger, this sort of attention had mortified him. Now, after years without, he found he didn't mind a little mothering. Truth be told, whether he wanted to eat or not, he needed the food. How are you? She asked. Good, he said around spoonfuls of lettuce. She studied him. Really? He said. Good. Not great. Good enough. A block floated past, steaming with stormlight, glanced upward precisely enough to counteract its weight. Sina tapped it with a hesitant finger, sending it spinning through the room. Shouldn't those fall? She asked. Eventually, maybe? He shrugged. Navani has done something weird to the place. It's more than the fact that the tower is somehow warm now and the pressure equalized. The entire city is infused, like a sphere. Water flowed now from holes in walls. You simply had to press your hand to the top of the hole and ask, and it came streaming out. You asked for a temperature, and it came out that heat. Suddenly, a lot of the strange basins and empty pools in the tower made sense. They'd expected spigots, but most locations didn't have those, just mysterious outlets. He smiled as he watched Syl spin around Rodin, beginning twirling himself, then left him with a few blocks as a distraction. She popped to human size again and flopped down on her back next to Kaladin and his mother, her face covered in an illusionary approximation of sweat. How, Syl said, do small humans just keep going? Where does their energy come from? One of the great mysteries of the Cosmere, his mother said. If you think this is bad, you should have seen Cal. Oh, Syl said, rolling over and looking to her with wide eyes, her long, blue-white hair tumbling around her face. No human woman Kaladin had ever known would act in such a casual way wearing a hava. The tight dresses, while not strictly formal, weren't designed for rolling about on the ground barefooted. Syl, however, would be Syl. Embarrassing childhood stories, she said. Go, talk, while his mouth is full of food so he can't stop you. He never stopped moving, Asina said, leaning forward. Except when he finally collapsed at night to sleep, giving us brief hours of respite. I was required to sing his favorite song, and Laren would have to chase him. And he could tell if Laren was giving a half-hearted chase, and would chastise him. It was honestly the cutest thing to see Laren being chewed out by a 3-year-old. I could have guessed, Syl said, he would be tyrannical as a child. Not tyrannical, Asina said. He merely liked things to be the way that they should be, as he saw them. Children often are like that, Syl, except only one answer to any question, because nuance is difficult and confusing. Yeah, Kaladin said, scraping the last of the Lapis from his bowl. Children. That's a worldview that obviously only strikes children, never the rest of us. His mother gave him a side hug, one arm around his shoulders. The kind that seemed to grudgingly admit that he wasn't a little boy anymore. Do you sometimes wish, she asked him, the world were a simpler place? That easy answers of childhood were, in truth, the actual answers? Not anymore, he said, because I think the easy answers would condemn me, most everyone actually. That made his mother beam for some reason, even though it was a simple thing to say. Then her eyes got a certain mischievous sparkle to them. He knew his mother and knew to be wary of what was coming next. So, you have a friend, she said. Did you ever ask her that important question you always asked me? He sighed, bracing himself. And which question would that be, Mother? Poop's friend, she said, poking him. You were always so fascinated by the idea. That was Tien, Kaladin said. That was not me. She returned a knowing stare. Mothers, they remember too well. Fine, he said. Maybe I was intrigued. He glanced at Syl, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Did you ever know any Poop's friend, she said flatly. He nodded. Like the stinky stuff that comes out of you when you think I'm not looking, she said. That stuff. The world is ending, and this is what you want to know. You're asking the only living daughter of the storms, princess of the honor spread, this question. How much poop do I personally know? It's just something that came up, he said, now and then when we were boys. If Poop actually had a friend or... Oh, I know tons, Syl said, barely keeping a straight face. We had them over for dinner all the time. Stormfather and I knew an entire Poop family. I do not want to discuss the topic anymore, Kaladin said. Please can we move on? I don't need to know more about Poop. Unfortunately, Orodin wandered over and was watching the conversation with interest. He stepped up and patted Kaladin on the knee. It's okay, Kagan, he said in a comforting voice, with a tone of repetition, repeating something he'd been told. Who goes in the potty? Do better next time, you get a treat. This, of course, sent Syl into a fit of uproarious laughter, flopping on her back again. Kaladin gave his mother his captain's glare. One he knew from experience was good enough to make any soldier go white. Mothers, however, ignored the chain of command, and the glare only made her seem more amused. All right, we're going to stop there. Like I said, first draft. I can already tell you after going a little bit. way into it. One of the things that's a problem here is Kaladin knows something he shouldn't know yet that the enemy is mobilizing, because this is probably going to end up being chapter 1, so we need to find out that information later. So you will probably find out that information like chapter 2 or 3 and be like, oh, why is the enemy mobilizing? He won't know it yet. So those sorts of things happen a lot in early drafts where you're writing through, you know the outline, you're not sure where the chapters will end up going, and things like that. So anyway, there is a very early look at some stuff. I thought you guys might appreciate that in light of some of the questions I was asked. This we are planning for 2024. I'm sorry, it's not next year, but we plan to do a big Dragon Steel convention alongside it, hopefully here at the Salt Palace, and have lots of fun stuff. So. Is there a 4.5 plan? Yes, 4.5 is the book coordinator. Should be part of the Kickstarter for the Words of Radiant Slitherbound next year. You should be able to just get that like you got the other one. That'll be Rock's story. The plan is I will write that at some point, and we'll put it in the Kickstarter next summer for that. So anyway, thank you guys all. I appreciate you coming.